How expensive does a PC have to become for people simply stop buying one? Because what we are seeing right now is not just a few graphics cards getting more expensive. It is a strange moment where the exact same PC budget can suddenly buy a much weaker machine. People who bought their parts months earlier feel like they won the lottery. And people who waited are sitting there wondering if waiting was the biggest mistake they could have made. And after going through the reactions surrounding this PC price explosion, I honestly think the most interesting part is not the price itself. It is how differently people react to the exact same problem. Some people are furious. Some are laughing because they already built their machines. Some are refusing to spend another dollar. Some are saying the only rational move is to buy now before things get even worse. And then there is the most uncomfortable group of all. The people who actually need the computer. Because if you only want a PC for gaming, you can walk away. If that PC is how you make money, walking away is a completely different decision. That is where this whole situation gets much more complicated. The first thing that jumped out at me was just how quickly people started comparing old prices with current prices. And once you see those comparisons, it becomes almost impossible not to feel like you missed some kind of deadline. One viewer remembered buying a pair of 16GB DDR5 sticks for roughly 2.7 million Vietnamese dong, which is around $106. Now that same general class of memory was being discussed at prices around 12 million dong, or roughly $470. Think about that for a second. You are not talking about some futuristic component that suddenly became 10 times faster. You are talking about memory. The part of the PC that most people used to think of as one of the easiest things to upgrade. And when people see a component go from something that felt ordinary to something that feels completely absurd, the emotional reaction is immediate. It is not a calm economic calculation. It is shock. Then comes regret. And then comes that horrible sentence every PC builder knows. I should have bought it earlier. That sentence appears everywhere in situations like this. Someone sees a graphics card at a price they consider a little too high. They wait. They think the market will normalize. They tell themselves there is no reason to rush. Then 2 weeks later, the price jumps. Suddenly, the old price does not look expensive anymore. It looks like a bargain. That psychological reversal is one of the biggest reasons these markets become so stressful. The price you rejected yesterday can become the price you desperately wish you had paid today. And that creates a completely different kind of fear. It is not the fear of missing a sale. It is the fear of missing the last reasonable price. One viewer described buying an RTX 5060 for around 7.6 million dong, roughly $300, and then watching prices rise afterward. Another person remembered seeing RTX 5060 cards around 8 to 8.5 million dong, roughly $315 to $335, and later seeing them around 10.7 to 11.5 million dong, which is roughly $420 to $450. That is enough to make someone stop thinking about specifications entirely. At that point, the conversation becomes emotional. You are no longer asking whether the card is good. You are asking whether you can afford to wait, and that is where the whole PC market starts creating a dangerous feedback loop. Prices rise. People hear that prices are rising. People become afraid that prices will rise again. Some of them rush to buy. That extra demand makes the market even hotter. Then the next person looks at the new price and thinks, I need to buy before it gets worse. And suddenly, fear becomes part of the pricing mechanism. This is why I found the reactions from people who already built their PCs so interesting. They are living in a completely different universe. The person who bought a PC before the price spike is not looking at the market and thinking, this is terrible. They are looking at the market and thinking, thank God I bought mine. One viewer talked about building a system in 2024 with a Ryzen 7 5000 series processor. A high-end graphics card, 64 gigabytes of memory, multiple terabytes of storage, and a premium cooling setup for around 53. 3 million dong, or roughly $2,100. The exact configuration matters less than the reaction. Looking back at today's prices, that old purchase suddenly feels incredibly cheap. And this is where the PC community develops one of its funniest reactions to a price crisis. The people who bought early start acting like they accidentally made a brilliant investment. Someone says they bought memory for a couple of million dong. Someone else says their old graphics card now costs dramatically more than what they paid. Another person jokes that their old PC might be worth more than expected. It is funny. But underneath the jokes is something real. The value of an old PC has changed psychologically. Not because the computer became faster. It did not. The machine is exactly the same. What changed is the price of replacing it. And that distinction is incredibly important. Your old PC can suddenly feel more valuable simply because building a new one has become painful. That is why some people who were planning upgrades are suddenly looking at their 5-year-old hardware and thinking, you know what? You can stay. You are doing fine. And honestly, I think that is one of the most rational reactions in the entire conversation. Because the upgrade cycle only makes sense when the improvement is worth the money. If your current machine already handles what you need, a huge increase in component prices changes the calculation. You do not have to upgrade just because a new generation exists. You do not have to replace a graphics card because a new model has a higher number. And you definitely do not have to spend thousands of dollars just because the market is telling you that waiting is dangerous. That is exactly where the second group appears. The people who simply refuse to participate, and some of these reactions are surprisingly aggressive. People are basically saying, fine, let the prices go up. I am not buying. One commenter described the strategy as essentially locking the wallet and refusing to play along. The idea is simple. If enough consumers stop buying overpriced hardware, eventually sellers and manufacturers have to deal with weaker demand. It sounds reasonable, but here is where I think the situation gets uncomfortable. That strategy only works if the consumer market actually has enough power, and if AI demand is absorbing enormous amounts of hardware, consumer boycotts may not have the same effect people expect. That is the controversial part. For years, gamers could imagine themselves as the center of the PC hardware ecosystem. Graphics cards were marketed to gamers. Benchmarks were designed around games. New generations were sold with higher frame rates, better rendering, better ray tracing, better visual quality. But AI changes the equation. If a manufacturer can sell enormous quantities of computing hardware into AI infrastructure, the company does not necessarily need every gamer to upgrade every 2 years. That changes the power relationship. The average gamer can say, I am not paying $500 for this card, and the manufacturer can potentially respond, okay, someone else will. That someone else may be a company buying hardware for servers, machine learning, data centers, or other high-compute applications. This is why I think the idea that gamers can simply boycott their way back to cheap hardware may be too optimistic. It is not impossible. It is just not guaranteed, and that is very different. The third group is even more interesting. These are the people who actually need a PC. Not because they want higher settings in a game. Not because they want a prettier case. Not because they want another upgrade for the sake of upgrading. They need it to work. And that changes everything. Imagine you are editing video, or doing 3D work, or running demanding engineering software, or processing large projects, or doing any job where waiting for a computer costs you real time. Now imagine your current machine takes twice as long to finish a task. You could save $500 by waiting for hardware prices to fall. But if your slower machine costs you hundreds of hours of productivity over the next year, that savings starts looking much less impressive. This is why one of the most interesting comments from the discussion basically argued that waiting for a cheaper PC can sometimes cost more than buying an expensive PC. That sounds counterintuitive until you think about opportunity cost. A gamer can say, "I will wait 2 years. The game will still be there." A worker may not have that luxury. If a faster machine helps them finish more projects, take more clients, render faster, edit faster, or simply avoid wasting hours every week, the computer is not just entertainment. It is equipment. And equipment is judged differently. This creates a divide that I think gets overlooked whenever people talk about PC prices. There is no universal correct answer to the question, should I buy? There is only a correct answer for a specific use case. If you have a perfectly functional computer and you mainly want a new graphics card because you are tempted by the latest generation, waiting can be incredibly sensible. If your computer is preventing you from doing your job, waiting could be expensive. That distinction sounds obvious. But when people are caught in the middle of a price spike, they often forget it. They start making decisions based on what everyone else is doing. That is where FOMO enters the room. And PC builders are especially vulnerable to FOMO because the market gives you endless ways to justify spending more. You start with a $1,000 budget. Then you see a slightly better CPU. It is only another $50. Then a better motherboard, another $30. Then a better graphics card, another $100. Then more memory, then a bigger SSD, then better cooling, then a nicer case. Suddenly, your $1,000 PC is a $1,400 PC, and you are sitting there telling yourself that every individual upgrade was reasonable. That is how people end up spending far more than they originally intended. One commenter captured this perfectly by warning that when you walk into a shop with a 20 million dong budget, around $790, someone can convince you to stretch toward 25 million dong, around $980. And then the justification begins. It is an investment. It will last longer. You might as well get the better model. You will regret buying the weaker one. Some of those arguments can be completely legitimate. But they become dangerous when the buyer no longer knows whether they are buying for their actual needs or buying to avoid regret. That is a huge psychological difference. Buying what you need is a decision. Buying because you are afraid you will regret not buying something better is emotional pressure. And a market with rapidly increasing prices makes that pressure much stronger. Because now there is another argument added to the conversation. Buy now because it might be even more expensive later. That sentence can be true. But even when it is true, it does not automatically mean you should buy. That is the part I think gets lost in the noise. A product becoming more expensive later does not magically make it affordable today. If your budget is $800 and the machine you actually want costs $1,100, the fact that it might cost $1,300 next month does not mean you suddenly have $1,100. Your financial reality has not changed. The market has. And those are two different things. That is why I found the comments from students and younger buyers especially revealing. Some people are preparing for college. They want a PC. They have a limited budget. They cannot simply throw another $300 or $500 at the problem because a graphics card increased in price. For someone with a large income, a price increase is annoying. For someone with a fixed budget, the same price increase can completely destroy the original plan. That is not a minor inconvenience. It can change what hardware they can realistically buy. A person who planned on a mid-range graphics card may end up with a lower-tier model. A person who planned for 32 gigabytes of memory may settle for 16. A person who planned for a new build may decide to buy used hardware, and someone who wanted a desktop may end up buying a laptop because the laptop gives them a more predictable all-in-one package. That is another reaction that appeared repeatedly. People basically said, "Forget the desktop for now. I will use a laptop." I will use my old computer. I will buy used. I will wait. I will do anything except pay these prices. And I think that is a warning sign for the desktop market. Because the biggest risk of high prices is not that people complain. People always complain. The real risk is that people change their habits. If enough consumers decide that building a desktop is no longer worth the money, they begin looking for substitutes. A laptop, a console, cloud gaming, used hardware, an older PC, a workstation they already own, anything that avoids the new hardware market. And once consumers discover that they can live without upgrading, convincing them to come back can become much harder. But there is another side to this. Some people are still buying, and they are not necessarily foolish. One viewer talked about building a high-end system for roughly 85 million dong, or around $3,300, including a premium graphics card, high-end processor, fast memory, large storage, high-end power supply, multiple displays, and expensive aesthetic components. You can look at that and say, that is insane. Or you can look at it and say, if that person has the money and the system gives them exactly what they want, the price is irrelevant to someone else's budget. That is the uncomfortable truth. A price can be objectively high and still be worth paying for a particular person. The problem begins when the market starts making people feel like they have to spend at that level just to get a normal computer. That is where the definition of normal starts shifting, and we have seen that shift happening in the comments. Configurations that used to be described as comfortable mid-range builds are now being discussed as compromises. People who once recommended 32 gigabytes of memory are now talking about 16. People who once considered a certain graphics card a reasonable target are now saying a lower-tier model may have to be enough. People who wanted a 2K gaming experience are reconsidering whether they should stay at 1080p. That is not simply a price increase. That is a reduction in expectations. And when a market forces consumers to lower their expectations, something important has changed. The entire meaning of value has moved. That is why the reactions from longtime PC users are so emotional. They remember what this money used to buy. They remember when a few million dong could dramatically change a build. They remember buying memory at prices that now seem almost ridiculous in hindsight. They remember graphics cards that once looked expensive and now look cheap. And they are comparing those memories to the current market. That comparison creates anger because technology is supposed to get better over time. Consumers are conditioned to expect more performance for the same money. That is the traditional technology story. A newer generation arrives. Performance improves. Prices eventually normalize. The old model becomes cheaper. You get more for your dollar. But what happens when the opposite appears to be happening? When a newer market force increases the cost of critical components, when the same budget buys less, when older hardware holds its value because replacement costs have exploded. That breaks the mental model people have built around technology. And I think that is why the reaction feels so dramatic. People are not just angry about paying more. They are angry because the rules they thought they understood have stopped working. And there is another fascinating reaction. Some people are trying to reinterpret the entire situation as an opportunity. Used hardware suddenly looks attractive. Older platforms suddenly look smarter. Upgrading an existing system becomes more appealing. A person with an older CPU might decide to upgrade only the processor instead of rebuilding the entire machine. Someone might keep their old memory. Someone might buy a used graphics card. Someone might build around the parts they already own. That is actually a very different mindset from traditional PC building. Instead of asking, what is the best PC I can build today? People are asking, how little do I need to replace? That question is extremely important because when prices are normal, optimization means maximizing performance. When prices are abnormal, optimization means minimizing spending while preserving enough performance. Those are completely different strategies. And you can see that change happening in the comments. People are talking about keeping older systems alive. They are discussing used GPUs. They are considering secondhand SSDs. They are thinking about reusing memory. They are looking at older platforms that would normally have been dismissed. That is the survival mode of a market under pressure. And honestly, I think it is one of the healthiest reactions. Not because everyone should buy old hardware, but because it forces people to return to the most important question. What do you actually need? Not what is the newest, not what is the fastest, not what looks best in a benchmark. What do you actually need? If you play competitive games at 1080p, you do not automatically need a flagship GPU. If you edit occasionally, you may not need an extreme workstation. If your current machine already handles your workload, upgrading because a new generation exists may be unnecessary. And if your actual use case requires a powerful system, then at least you can spend the money intentionally. That is much better than letting the market decide your budget for you. There is also a fascinating generational difference hiding underneath this entire conversation. People who have already experienced several hardware cycles tend to have a different relationship with upgrades. They know that today's flagship becomes tomorrow's old hardware. They have seen prices rise and fall. They know that chasing every generation can become an expensive hobby. Meanwhile, someone building their first serious PC may feel much more pressure. They want to get it right. They want the machine to last. They do not want to buy something and immediately regret it. So when the market becomes expensive, first-time builders are hit particularly hard. They have no previous build to fall back on. They have no old GPU sitting in a drawer. They have no extra memory. They cannot easily reuse a platform. The entire purchase happens at once. That is why the current market can feel especially brutal to new builders. And this is where I think the most important lesson from the reactions appears. The people who are least affected by the price spike are often the people who already have a functioning PC. That sounds obvious, but it changes the entire strategy. A functioning computer gives you something extremely valuable: time. You do not have to make a decision today. You can wait for information. You can watch prices. You can compare alternatives. You can see whether AI demand changes. You can see whether supply increases. You can wait for a new generation. You can wait for a used market to develop. You can simply keep working. Someone without a computer has much less freedom, and that difference explains why two people can look at the same price and reach completely opposite conclusions. One says, "This is insane, I am waiting." The other says, "I need this machine, so I am buying it." Neither person is necessarily wrong. Their situations are different. But then there is the argument that prices could stay high for years. Some commenters were talking about waiting several years. Others argued that AI is not like previous speculative bubbles because AI is already being used in real products and services. Others believe that if AI infrastructure spending slows down, memory and GPU demand could eventually cool off. And this is where I would be very careful about making confident predictions. Nobody watching a YouTube comment section knows exactly where hardware prices will be 2 or 3 years from now. Maybe supply expands. Maybe demand cools. Maybe manufacturers shift production. Maybe a new architecture changes the economics. Maybe AI demand remains enormous. Maybe something completely unexpected happens. The important point is that waiting is a bet too. People sometimes talk about waiting as if it is the neutral option. It is not. If you wait, you are betting that future conditions will be better for you. If you buy, you are betting that the value you get from using the hardware now is worth the money. Both are decisions under uncertainty. And that is why the phrase I kept seeing in the reactions, "Basically do not be a waiting addict," is more complicated than it sounds. Waiting can save money. Waiting can also cost money. Buying can protect you from future price increases. Buying can also lock you into a terrible price if the market later collapses. There is no magical strategy that eliminates risk. The real strategy is understanding which risk you can actually afford. And this brings me back to the most absurd part of the entire situation. People are beginning to talk about old PCs almost like they are collectibles. Someone mentioned a system built years ago for around 25 million dong, roughly $980, that now looks incredibly cheap compared with today's equivalent. Another person talked about a machine built for around 20 million dong, roughly $790. That included hardware that would now cost dramatically more. And then you realize something strange. The best time to have bought a PC may have been months ago, but obviously, nobody can live their life with perfect hindsight. You cannot go back and buy the cheaper RAM. You cannot go back and grab the graphics card at the old price. You can only make the decision from where you are standing. That is why regret is probably the least useful reaction. It feels good to say, I should have bought earlier. But it does not solve today's problem. The useful question is different. Given today's prices, what is the smartest move now? Maybe that means buying. Maybe it means waiting. Maybe it means buying used. Maybe it means upgrading only one component. Maybe it means lowering your graphics settings. Maybe it means keeping the old PC for another year. Maybe it means choosing a laptop. Maybe it means deciding that you simply do not need a new computer right now. And I think that last option is more powerful than people realize. The PC industry has trained consumers to think that upgrading is normal. New GPU, new CPU, new platform, new memory, new display, new storage. But sometimes the smartest upgrade is no upgrade. If your current machine does what you need, the market can scream as loudly as it wants. You do not have to listen. That is why the people laughing about their old PCs may actually have the strongest position right now. They are not winning because their hardware suddenly became faster. They are winning because they are not forced to participate. And the people who are furious about prices are not necessarily overreacting either. If a mainstream gaming PC that used to fit comfortably within a normal budget suddenly requires hundreds of extra dollars for comparable hardware, that is a legitimate problem. The PC market becomes less accessible. First-time builders get pushed away. Budget gamers get pushed toward older hardware. People who wanted to build for college have to rethink their plans. And people who simply wanted a reasonable upgrade are being told that the old definition of reasonable may no longer exist. That is a pretty dramatic change. But perhaps the most controversial conclusion is this. The PC market does not actually care whether gamers think prices are ridiculous. It cares whether people continue buying. That sounds harsh. But markets respond to behavior, not outrage. You can write the angriest comment in the world about a graphics card being overpriced. If someone else buys it anyway, the market has received a very different message. That is why the real reaction to high PC prices is not the comment section. It is what people actually do with their wallets. Do they buy? Do they wait? Do they buy used? Do they switch platforms? Do they keep their old hardware? Do they decide they can live without the upgrade? Those decisions will matter much more than whether everyone agrees that the prices are crazy. And that is exactly why I think the current PC situation is so fascinating. It is not simply a story about expensive RAM. It is not simply a story about expensive GPUs. It is not even simply a story about AI. It is a story about what happens when a technology market changes faster than consumer expectations can adapt. The person who bought early feels like a genius. The person who waited feels punished. The gamer says no. The professional says I need it. The student says I cannot afford it. The enthusiast says I will pay anyway. The old PC owner says I am keeping mine. The used market says there is another option. And somewhere in the middle, everyone is trying to figure out what normal is supposed to mean anymore. Because maybe the biggest problem is not that PCs are expensive. Maybe the biggest problem is that we are no longer sure what a fair PC is supposed to cost. So if the market keeps moving in this direction, What happens when a normal gaming PC stops feeling like a normal purchase and starts feeling like a luxury? And if that happens, will people keep paying anyway? Or will the PC market finally discover just how far consumers are willing to walk away?
If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe and hit the bell to the later update from my channel. Thank you for watching till the end and see you in the next video.